the rivers are getting polluted because there is no way the sewerage infrastructure can match up with the amount of pollution that the city generates.
The city governments themselves need to look at it beyond the support that they get from the central government to look at the longer term security challenges for each city. Now, whether the cities are equipped with it or not is the question.
Cities do not really have a hang of how much water they are using and how much wastewater they are discharging into the rivers. Our cities need support. Our cities need guidance on how they can be brought out of this vicious cycle of droughts and
Hello and welcome. Well, today we are discussing day zero, the future of water, and we're talking about urban water crisis in India and what we imagine could be certain solutions, the way forward. How can we avoid day zero? Day zero, refers to the day when our taps run dry. It's a very dystopian sort of outlook. And we saw this crisis in many of our cities in the last couple of years. We've seen things happening around the world, in South Africa and Cape Town as well. And that's where the day zero is really, talked about. But we've also had what are the big challenges you see there?
Urban water security is certainly a challenge. And one of the questions that were posed was that, is there an urban water policy that is there? We don't have a water policy as such, but urban water policy as such. But the recent drafting committee that was put together to, draft a national water policy did treat urban water security as a separate head. And it does require an attention given the kind of developments in the recent times. But I would think that what the national water policy is something that would basically give you a broad contours. But I think what we need is a pool of strategies that are needed for Indian context to address the specific challenges of cities within India. The kind of schemes recently that has been thought about, the Jal Jeevan mission,
Yes.
to bring in tap water to every household, is one of those kind of approaches that are being talked about. But there is also a certain level of responsibility at the city scale. The city governments themselves need to look at it beyond the support that they get from the central government to look at the longer term security challenges for each city. Now, whether the cities are equipped with it or not is the question.
So what do you see as the challenges and solutions going forward to provide water and better water security in our cities?
the landscape has changed and there is no flood cushioning capacity within our cities, and therefore we are facing. So we are into that vicious cycle, and I think our cities need support. Our cities need guidance on how they can be brought out of this vicious cycle of droughts and floods. That's number one. Number two, you and I are responsible too, because we use water merely in whatever places we live. We are supplied with groundwater, municipal supply being unreliable in many cities. We are dependent on groundwater, and we use water merely. And how do you change our lifestyles and consumption to value our water? I think this is one of the issues that we are seeing across cities. The rivers are getting polluted because there is no way the sewerage infrastructure can match up with the amount of pollution that the city generates. So we need to look upstream to say that, okay, I need to restrict the amount of wastewater that I am putting into the rivers, and therefore I need to plug or cap my demand. And this is exactly what many cities across the globe has done. And you talked about Cape Town. If you look at Cape Town, there are five-pronged strategy. One of the strategy is to make the city water sensitive and to promote wise use of water. So I think some lessons can be drawn, and as a very responsible society, we have had the huge tradition of water harvesting in the past, and we respect water, and somehow it has changed. One of the things that comes to my mind is way back in 2000, Indore was the first city to give a tax rebate on rainwater harvesting structures. at that time, thinking about that kind of a concept was completely different. Bangalore has rainwater harvesting made mandatory in its building laws. So the point is that how do you incentivize the citizenry to respect rainwater? Okay, so because you need to value water. So the fundamental point that I'm trying to drive here is that we need to differentiate between pricing and value of water. So the moment you value and respect water, naturally some of these conservation related activities also actions come into play. Jal Shakti, the Jal Shakti Abhiyan, which was launched a few years back, has actually done quite a bit in terms of revival of water harvesting structures, promoting rainwater harvesting, etc. I think over a period of time, what we will see is that many of the cities will move into this direction. What kind of fiscal instruments that we can give, incentives and encouragement that we can give to the citizens is something that we need to work out. And I think that's the only thing that can drive mass scale rainwater harvesting. Now, I want to put a caveat here. While we drive rooftop rainwater harvesting, it's important to not forget lakes in our cities. It will be very sad to see lakes being converted into property.
Definitely. And if you could just explain a bit more about that, because even in Delhi, there is a project, all the lakes have been identified, the ones that have gone dry, and there is a, move to rejuvenate those lakes. And that's something that's going to help pull up the water table and, harness the water and also help when it comes to flooding and the situation that we face when there's too much rainfall. So if you could talk a bit about that.
Absolutely, and Delhi has no option because Delhi is heavily dependent on groundwater as well. We get enormous amount of water from other rivers, but groundwater dependence is huge, and the groundwater is going down, and therefore, we need wetlands, we need lakes to restore and revive our groundwater levels. That's number one. Delhi is a good example of how the city is thinking. There was this announcement saying that the Delhi government wants Delhi to be a lake city, which is great, and that's something that many activists and many organizations have been arguing for. What it does is, again, I want to go back. It doesn't just offer water security, but also resilience to the variabilities in climate. You're not really worried about flooding and droughts, when your wetland systems are healthy. And that's something that we need to sort of really focus on. And amazing examples across the country. And, you must have heard about this young professional from Noida moving around from village to village, reviving ponds, with no support, no financial support from anyone. He's actually self-motivated. He's going across.
So it does seem, we need a mix of government push as well as, at the higher level, and a lot of local efforts, be it, residences, colonies, people themselves, and various departments. If we were just talking about conflict, and Mr. Srinivas, if you could, what do you envision as a possible conflict in the future that we need to watch out for when it comes to our water resources?
Well, you see, when it comes to urban water security, there could be conflicts across between interest groups and between sectors within the city. But also, if you look at the trends of urbanization within India, and this is the interstate water conflicts, river water conflicts are also very relevant for urban water security. And as I was saying, if you take any of the metropolitan city, most of the, in fact, every metropolitan city, if you look at the portfolio of sources that the city draws on, a significant proportion comes from interstate arrangements over river waters, access to river waters. Now, if you take, for example, if you take Delhi, it relies on agreements with the upstream states like, Himachal Pradesh and Haryana. And, if you take Chennai for that matter, a significant proportion is contributed by the Telugu Ganga, agreement. So it is interstate coordination as opposed, which is basically resolution of conflicts over interstate rivers, is very relevant to urban water security. And if you take the recent Kaveri dispute, which Suresh was referring to, the entire rationalization of allocation of additional water to Karnataka is to meet the requirements of Bengaluru city. So they do matter. So effective and efficient interstate river water conflict resolution is a precondition for ensuring urban water security.
We just spoke about, rejuvenating lakes. Let's talk about rivers now. And Suresh Babu, that's something you've worked on. I've also, covered the whole, we did a series at NDTV on the Ganga and, what are the problems and challenges and why, even though it's our most holy and, river that we pray to, it's still one of the most polluted. And a lot of 85% of India's water does go into agriculture. And I know a lot of the river water also gets diverted into canals for agriculture. Is there some way we could better manage that so that more efficiently, so we have more water for our cities as well? And the biggest problem is our rivers are all very, very polluted, because all along the way we dump all our garbage, toxins, everything into the rivers, even though there have been efforts to prevent that, and a lot of money has been put into that as well. So if you could explain that, our river management, and how it could better serve our cities.
Yeah, there are two issues that you touched about. One, the rivers are flowing lean and dry. There is no water because water diversions happen for agriculture and other purposes. The second one is around the pollution. So let me touch the first part. Okay, so the agriculture part, as you rightly said, the majority of the water goes into agriculture. Then why not agriculture sector be a partner in reviving our rivers? So the government of India, particularly the Namami Gange, they had been actually talking about promoting water use efficiency, zero budget farming, etc., in a mission to revive the avirilta of the river. And I just want to share a small example of how few sugarcane farmers came together with the irrigation department of Uttar Pradesh, WWF, and other partners to look at how water use efficiency can be optimized in sugarcane. And I'm very excited. After 4 years of work, a small river called Karula, which flows through Bijnor and it flows into Ramganga, got revived because of the initiatives of the farmers. They've moved from flood irrigation to furrow irrigation. They've actually gone into biofertilizers and biopesticide, which actually made the soil less thirstier, and the water saved flew back into the river. So I'm saying, I'm sure that there are hundreds and thousands of people practicing this. This needs to be mainstream. And these stories need to be told so that every farmer, every stakeholder who uses water has an example to follow and promote river rejuvenation. That's number one. Number two is, of course, by the time the river reaches, typically in a city, it's already lean. And what we are trying to do is to pump as much water for our drinking water and domestic purposes, and pump back all the wastewater back into the river. And therefore, we are actually complicating and increasing the vulnerabilities and the problems of the river. Now, how do you stop it? First of all, city water footprint. Cities do not really have a hang of how much water they are using and how much wastewater they are discharging into the rivers. And therefore, you mentioned about Indore. Indore was the first water plus city under the Swachhata Sarvekshan. And what it wanted the cities to do was to, one, measure all the wastewater that is discharged, and to ensure that every drop of wastewater is tapped and treated, and 25% of that water is reused. So as an idea, it's great. At that time, I think it was in 2020, it was categorized as the water plus city, and there are, I think, 8 more cities who have been added. This is a good step in the right direction. Now, what we need to add is the layer of demand management. Which city has reduced its water use from X to X by 2 for a period of time? And let us create competition between cities so that the water use goes down. And you may remember, there are this water efficient home campaigns by the Public Utilities Board in Singapore, and I talked about the Cape Town example of demand management, etc. Now, can it happen in India? And again, there are small towns which are trying to, do campaigns around water use efficiency and stuff like that, and this needs to be mainstream. For instance, how can water use efficiency be brought in at our homes in terms of in our flush, in our showers, in our daily plumbing infrastructure? So this needs to be sort of looked at in a big way if we were to address the issues of the rivers. When you look at the river needs to be connected, both the longitudinal connectivity, that is, it has to be connected upstream and downstream. It also has to be connected with the floodplains. when the flood comes, and if you look at typically most of the cities which get flooded are the ones which has destroyed their floodplains. So we need to create that water cushioning, flood cushioning facilities. We have to retain that. And Srinivas talked about an urban water policy. And I think an integral part of that policy should be a policy on protection of floodplains and the non-negotiability of that, so that it acts as an ecological zone. It brings in water, it brings in life, it absorbs, it recharges groundwater, and it provides resilience from flooding. And I think that's something that we need to look at. And again, I'm aware of a project by NMCG in Uttar Pradesh, where they are trying to map all the wetlands around the floodplains of the Ganga in an effort to come up with a conservation plan. I think more and more cities need to be encouraged to sort of understand what a floodplain is. And
Mr. Srinivas, if we could just talk about, also when we talk about urban water issues, the inequality is very stark, and that remains another, very big problem, because many of us take water for granted. But I know there are large parts of Delhi where people, get water for just a few minutes or maybe an hour at night, etc. So that's the other issue of how we're supplying the water all around. And Suresh Babu spoke about the economics behind water. I remember long ago Sheila Dikshit government had tried to do some kind of project with the World Bank in which they were going to charge for water, and there was big hue and cry about that. But yes, water efficiency and a better equity when it comes to water in our cities is also very important, isn't it?
There have been several experiences of using pricing as a kind of equalizer, but then I think it is something that we haven't taken a consolidated and coherent view about basically forming guidelines to guide the city governments to formulate policies for it. I think that is one gap, and I think there's something that Suresh did mention, something referring to that. You see, when you say urban water policy, I think these are the kind of guidelines that city governments would need. A kind of pool of strategic guidelines that city governments could follow. I mean, at one level, following protocols like Water Plus that the Indo has followed to increase the water saving and show that it can save the water and put wastewater back into the cycle, and again pricing the strategies that would suit Indian conditions, Indian cities conditions, and other kind of policies, including not entirely blocking the conventional approaches, like even relying on the storage structures. There is there's a portfolio of strategies that the city governments could follow. And urban water policy, if at all there is something that we could produce, should constitute something like that to guide the city governments.
Yeah, sorry to come in there. And in terms of guidance, I was just reminded of a guideline that the Ministry of Jal Shakti and NIUA has come up with, the National Institute of Urban Affairs. This is on urban river management plans. And actually the core of that guidance is around how we can do river-centric urban planning. And it talks about 3 pillars, looking at the environmental sustainability, which looks at protection of the natural resources. It talks about economic opportunities, which is basically enhancing the ecosystem services offered by some of these natural systems. And the third one is the social sustainability, which is basically engaging the stakeholders and increasing the ownership. And I think that's kind of a forward-looking document, which, to our understanding, Kanpur is the only city who has come up with an urban river management plan, which followed this guideline. And if many other cities can look at it, that could be a good point.
Just speaking on that, I think the MOH, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, has had these guidelines, basically something that we did touch upon earlier also, using the master plan instrument as a very effective instrument to bring in this more efficient river management, river-centric urban planning and management practices. Now, that's something that Delhi Master Plan recently tried to follow. And what I see is that there is a major knowledge gap about how the instrument as it's a very potent instrument to shape the cities and cities' growth, as well as to manage resources like water within the cities. Unfortunately, we don't have adequate understanding about how effectively we can use this very powerful instrument of master plan to pursue those goals and objectives about river-centric urban management and governance.
All right. I wanted to ask both of you now about, looking forward. We spoke about best practices and, cities that seem to be doing better and various things that can be followed. But what is your view going forward, decades, if we talk about 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, do you think we'll be better placed? Will we be pushing? We're seeing a population explosion as well, where there's issues of climate change and, changing weather patterns, etc. So first you, Mr. Srinivas, your view on this and going forward, what do you think and what do you envision?
I think, what you're looking at is, if you're looking at 2050 or, further down, I think more than half of India's population is going to be within urban areas. They will be concentrated, the population will be concentrated in large urban agglomerations. I think there needs to be this a pool of strategies that I've been sort of stressing in, right from practices by the citizens themselves to the cities' long-term planning measures, which might include augmentation of storage structures, and also to improve the efficiency of the cycle, hydrological cycle within the cities by bringing in protocols like water plus cities. That is certainly feasible. But you also mentioned about climate change. As I did say, and I have been saying it, it's very easy to basically blame it on climate change whenever we fail in addressing the governance challenges. You take urban scarcity or otherwise urban floods, both of them, in my view, I'll definitely take it as a governance failure over climate change, partly because, in fact, actually we know very little about climate change and water. The link itself is very limited, understood. If you take the recent perhaps the most authoritative report, it is the UN Waters report saying, climate change and water, saying basically that we do know that there is going to be overwhelming, connection between, hydrological regime changes and climate change. And it might lead to significant uncertainties as well as extreme events. Beyond that, we don't know anything. Actually, we need to develop certain level of understanding about, the report itself basically notes that we have huge ambiguities about what it entails when it comes to the implications at the local and regional scales. So we really don't know what are the implications to, when it comes to city level scale implications for, urban scarcity or otherwise urban flood. So, you can clearly give other kind of explanations about the failure of transition to better practices, demand-side management practices, and at the same time, neglect of long-term planning for the city requirements. Both combined could lead to disaster.
I would say I have a very positive outlook. I can imagine that India would have by then notified all its 755,000 wetlands, and all the villages, almost taking care of its wetland. All cities integrating urban planning, and water together, and they are becoming water resilient, climate resilient cities. There is no option for us. There is no option. When you look 20 years back, the way we used to look at water, the crisis is hitting us hard, and that's why we are seeing champions across the country. And I don't know how many of them. I'm inspired every time I travel. I meet someone doing their bit, and I think given the scale of population that we have, and if we have great communication channels, we have great education system. If you imbibe, if you inculcate this behavior towards water, respect for water, value for water, I think we are in for a leadership position as far as water is concerned. I would also say that the talk about lifestyle changes, it has already begun. Okay, many people are not aware. I'm sure of that fact, and I'm not dismissing that. Many people are very careless about water, but many are beginning to consider that, okay, I need to close my tap while brushing. It's very simple, but it saves 1 liter water. And like Srini said, today we have 400 million people in cities, and everyone saving one drop is 400 milliliters of water. Every one of us in our colonies coming together to protect a wetland would result in 755,000 wetlands being protected and saved. So I think the way we need to demystify what water conservation is, that's very important. You can do it, we together can do it at different scales. That's number one. Number two, I would say that the current skills that are vested within the town planning framework or mechanism or governance system has to change. There will be a multidisciplinary approach many cities are taking, but I think the town planning, that's why we need to catch all the architectural institutions, engineering institutions to bring in that change in approach. Town planning is not just about land and infrastructure, but it's also about natural systems. So I think that shift in approach in education will also bring in a huge change. But I'm also of the firm believer that cities cannot afford to lose even an inch of wetlands anymore, inch of rivers anymore, and therefore we need to address that. Number one. Number two, we need to place cities within a larger ecosystems. Cities are part of a basin. Okay, there is upstream, there is downstream. So unless you have nested plans, city can make a river-centric urban plan. But how does that interact with the basin plan? How does that interact with water allocations? How does that interact with agriculture water use, industrial water use? Is essentially very, very important. What is that framework? And I think Srini will be in a better position to talk about this. Are there a discussion around that institutional framework around bringing all these things together at the basin scale is very, very important. So if you address the practices at the local level, policies at the larger basin scale, and education and awareness, I think we are in for a big change. And I'm very optimistic seeing many people coming forward for water, fighting for wetlands, fighting for rivers. And I think we'll be inspired to carry on with some good work and scale it up at the country.
One of the issues that's slightly controversial that's been spoken about for so many years in India is the river linking, project, and this talk of how we have floods in the northeast and how can we help in, better, having water going to areas where there's less water from these areas which are facing floods, etc. So if you could talk about that, is there any sort of thinking at this point? Because right now, I think it's only the talk is on Ken and Betwa in Madhya Pradesh, and hopefully it's not going to go any further from there.
The fundamental principle there is interbasin transfer. And interbasin transfer of water is not something that we have just begun with interlinking project. This has been going on forever, and this has met the needs of our growth. For example, as I did mention, the Chennai city would not have been there if Telugu Ganga project, which is an interbasin transfer, did not happen. So the point that I try to make when it comes to, which is a moderate,
if you could explain that further a little bit.
You see, Telugu Ganga project is a project that transfers Krishna waters to Tamil Nadu to meet Chennai water requirements, drinking water requirements. This is a unique project, partly because this is one of those few instances where a non-riparian state has been provided with shares by an agreement between riparian states. So Krishna water, the riparian states were Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, and now with Telangana together, which is binding on them. So all the three states at the time when this agreement was signed agreed to give away 5 TMC of their share, their allocated shares to this project, so that the Chennai could get 15 TMC water. That's the agreement, Telugu Ganga project. Now, before Telugu Ganga project was kind of initiated, the scarcity within Chennai was such a severe scarce that there were proposals at the time to relocate Chennai. Now, it is the Telugu Ganga project that basically brought a certain amount of supplementary support for the water needs of Chennai. So the point that I was going back to that, it is an interbasin transfer project, and it did support. So the point, as I did say, the way I would look at it is that let us not reject the paradigm of interbasin transfer, but one can reject the projects. Now, obviously, certain projects are entirely irrational and sometimes perhaps driven by the nexus that we talk about, which is the politician, engineer, contractor. But it doesn't, those are the projects that need to be scrutinized and rejected. But as a paradigm, I don't think that is a sensible thing.
Any closing remarks, Suresh Babu, if something you'd like to just, close this conversation?
So what we do with our cities will reflect on our rivers. And so therefore, we need to make cities rivers sensitive, and the cities water smart, and people water sensitive.
The local water bodies within the cities require a strategy that is robust and resilient. And that is something that we haven't been doing really well.
Thank you so much both for joining us and talking about this very, very important issue. And hopefully there's no day zero in the future for our cities. Thank you.